Welcome to Jerry Recaps. The story continues. Cheon Mujin grabbed YuWon and took him inside the barrier. A message popped up as he entered. You've entered the heavenly demonic cave. The final test of the heavenly demonic cult will begin. His spinning vision returned back to normal. YuWon shook his head once and then looked around. He could see Mujin standing close to him. His surroundings were a dark, damp tunnel. It was a cave. Mujin turned to look at YuWon and asked to follow him closely. Mujin started striding forward. YuWon started a fire to light up the dark, humid cave, holding it above his hand like a torch. His tensions were at an all-time high as he followed Mujin. Did you learn the heavenly demon spirit? Mujin asked. YuWon responded yes. It was turned into a skill while walking behind Mujin. Then it'll probably be easier to handle now. The world's become a much better place, said Mujin. He sounded like an old grandpa, but YuWon could understand where Mujin was coming from. Mujin was one of the oldest rankers alive, an ancient ranker. You're an excellent fighter, I have watched your fight. Mujin threw out a sudden compliment. Take good care of it. Take care? YuWon asked in confusion, but he didn't get a response back. YuWon didn't understand what Mujin could have meant by take care. As he closed in, a message popped up. Nameless egg bares its fangs. Nameless egg salivates. The egg started having a reaction. Inside the quiet cave, the footsteps of the two echoed loudly. The fire in YuWon's hand flickered, even though there was no wind. And that wasn't the only thing. Towards the end of the heavenly demonic cave, a light could be seen in the distance, a purple, flickering light. It was a sensation that was similar yet different from mana. There really was something here, YuWon thought. As he got closer to the fire, YuWon could see the identity of the light. It was a fire. A purple, shimmering fire. The fire wasn't that large. It was only the size of an adult male's fist, and it floated up in the air like some sort of will-o-wisp. It was so faint, he could only feel it now that he'd gotten this close to it, but YuWon was sure that this was a power that came from outside the tower. The egg, on the other hand, had detected it much earlier. He couldn't feel any heat coming off of it, but YuWon felt an instinctive repulsion to the fire. It felt like just by getting close to it, his entire body would be burned to cinders. YuWon only managed to shake off the tension in his chest by taking deep breaths. Mujin spoke while staring at the fire. This is the divine fire. Divine fire? YuWon wondered. A divine fire. YuWon thought how simple of a name it was. And in his memory, there were quite a few skills with that name. It doesn't even feel like a divine power, YuWon thought. There's an old prophecy that's been passed down from long ago since the cult decided to settle down on Mount Heaven and discovered this fire. The cult exists to protect this fire and find its master. Mujin spoke with a sorrowful smile. The first heavenly demon of the cult, the second heavenly demon, and even my master. They all passed after living for this purpose. It is the same for me as well. YuWon spoke up staring at Cheon Mujin. He said, a prophecy. I'm having a hard time relating to it. Cheon Mujin replied to YuWon's confusion. It's a boring old tale that can't keep up with the times. But believing and following such things is a common habit among geezers like me. Do you truly believe in the prophecy? Asked YuWon. The heavenly demonic cult is a religion first and foremost before it is a martial school. And religion is something where the foundation will falter when faith wavers. Mujin's faith in the cult did not waver an inch while answering YuWon's question. Despite having lived a much longer life than his predecessors, he still placed all his faith in the cult. However, in this tower, there are factions much larger than the cult, and there are also people much stronger than me. That's why I had no choice but to use a trick to protect the holy fire from them. Is that why you created a test with the holy fire as a reward? Said YuWon while curiously looking at Mujin. He replied saying, that's right. Thanks to that, the difficulty has become like this. By using the test as a guise, he could hide and protect the divine fire, YuWon thought while staring at the flame floating midair. YuWon then asked, has anyone ever managed to make it this far? Mujin replied saying, the Sword Lord. He's seen this before. Purple light could be seen reflecting in Mujin's eyes as he stared at the divine fire. But he didn't manage to beat it. That was only natural. The power of an outer god wasn't something that a player who had just climbed to the 10th floor could win against. It was a fire that even a ranker would have a hard time beating, so of course the Sword Lord couldn't do it as a normal player. However, this is most likely not an impossible test. If that was the case, the administrator wouldn't have allowed this test to exist, Mujin said while looking at YuWon. This is the final test. With those words, the holy fire, which was only the size of a fist, started to grow larger. Survive through this fire. Endure it until you are acknowledged by the holy fire. The fire slowly grew larger and larger. Endure the holy fire. When you surrender, this test will end. Messages popped up with the announcement of what the test was. YuWon still couldn't feel any actual heat, but it still felt like it might swallow and melt YuWon to the bones at any moment. YuWon looked at the purple, shimmering fire. The holy fire quickly grew in size, already reaching the roof of the cave. Without even needing to move, it felt like the fire would soon swallow him. Mujin stared at the purple sea of flames before looking over at YuWon. So it's hard even for him, Mujin thought. Needing to walk into such a fire. It was honestly a ridiculous test. There was a tale of the great sage Sun Wukong enduring over 40 days inside an 8-trigram crucible. However, that was a test given to Wukong when he was nearing the top of the tower. It was the same way for Shinmugwek. The Sword Lord Shinmugwek managed to get directly in front of the holy fire. However, he was unable to actually challenge the test. It was because of fear. It might be better for him to give up. This is a fire that can even swallow a rancor. Mujin knew very well that this was a difficult test. Even if YuWon had the skills to take on the Fist Lord's punches, he was still just a normal human in front of this mysterious power. Still, he managed to obtain the heavenly demon spirit, so... In the midst of Mujin's train of thought, YuWon, who had only been silently staring at the holy fire, started to walk forward. And at the same time, the holy fire opened its mouth as if inviting YuWon in. YuWon felt like a moth flying towards a flame as he stepped closer to the shimmering twilight fire. After just a few steps, the holy fire suddenly engulfed YuWon. Cinder Eyes resists the holy fire. YuWon's Cinder Eyes automatically activated. The fire wasn't hot. No, YuWon had to think that the fire wasn't hot. This fire grows by consuming fear, thought YuWon. Pyromancy robe resists the holy fire. Fortunately, YuWon had quite a bit of flame resistance. The divine fire wasn't a fire that just burned hot. It takes on the form of fire. It has the power to wear down those who feared it and burn them to cinders. That was the real reason why the holy fire was so dangerous. I cannot be afraid of the fire. It was hot. As he walked deeper inside, the heat grew stronger and the flames became more intense. The shimmering fire gathered together, forming images, changing constantly. It changed into hideous forms that couldn't be described with words, messing with YuWon's eyes. Nameless egg opens its eyes. Nameless egg bares its fangs. As YuWon entered the fire, messages started popping. YuWon could feel the egg twitching. Holding a tight grip on the inventory on his waist, he warned the egg, "Stay still," said YuWon. It was fine that it ate Orochi's corpse, but the holy fire was a different story. This was a test that YuWon had to overcome, especially if this was related to an evil creature from outside the tower. Also, if you eat this, there won't be anything left for me, said YuWon while staring at the egg. YuWon didn't believe in things like prophecies, but the system was trustworthy enough. The divine fire continued to grow, and as he walked deeper into the fire of his own will, YuWon's heart raced at a rapid pace. It was a sensation he hadn't felt in a while. Outers were beings that were beyond common sense and knowledge. Coming from a world outside the tower, they could make you feel fear worse than death just by coming face to face with them. That was exactly the situation YuWon was in right now. YuWon knew if he feared this power, he had no right to control this great power. YuWon stared into the eyes of the purple flame monster that wrapped around him. The divine flame circled around YuWon's body, eating his fear, and growing into a monster. I don't know what you are. But I've seen enough outers to be sick of them, said YuWon. He had already experienced more than enough psychological fear. In order to fight against the outers, you needed a strong mental foundation, or you wouldn't even be able to stand in front of them, let alone fight them. He walked forward, thinking back to the war against the outers, the fight against those bastards, the crumbling world, and the monsters that were swallowing it up. He had become weaker from returning to the past, but YuWon's mind was no different than back then. In fact, it had become stronger. The raging fire started engulfing YuWon's body. Suddenly YuWon fiercely stared at the purple flame and spoke in a rage, I'm not afraid of you. I have returned to win against you guys. The raging fire spread more fiercely as YuWon finished speaking, it engulfed his whole body. The fire then started entering YuWon's body. He could not do anything but bear the pain to become worthy of this great power. Suddenly the raging fire started calming down. The dark divine crystal shimmered brightly, and released its energy outward, increasing YuWon's recovery. In YuWon's field of vision, the divine fire that looked like a huge beast started turning into a small flame. The divine flame then split into 3 pieces. A message popped up, you passed the test of the heavenly demonic cult. You have obtained the title, Vice Lord of the Heavenly Demonic Cult. You obtained 100,000 points. You have obtained a skill of a higher tier than the colossal fire. The skill perishes. With the ringing message, YuWon was able to confirm that the test was over. You have obtained Holy Fire. You have obtained the right to move on to the 11th floor. The divine fire that floated around like a will-o-wisp slowly drifted around his field of vision. This was a very different response than earlier. So it doesn't intend on fighting me. The holy fire was now following him. The appearance of the vicious monster was a temporary form for the test. Mujin, who had been watching over the holy fire for ages, had never seen this happen before. But of course, that was inevitable since there was no one who had seriously attempted to obtain the holy fire before either. Did he give up? Mujin thought. The holy fire that had been growing as if it would fill the entirety of the heavenly demonic cave slowly died down. And from a distance, within the fire, YuWon's shadow became visible. So he's still alive, Mujin remarked. Mujin could only see YuWon's back, but he was standing up. Expecting the massive holy fire to return back to its normal state, Mujin waited. However, the divine fire did not return back to normal. A purple fire was wrapped around YuWon. Mujin's eyes widened. Could it be? He said in disbelief. This was something he had wanted all along, but because things had stayed the way they were for so long, he questioned if the day would ever come. Mujin looked at YuWon and the purple fire shimmering off his body. On top of that, the holy fire circled around YuWon like will-o-wisps. Unable to believe what was happening, Mujin quickly went over to YuWon and asked, "What happened?" Mujin looked at YuWon's eyes. YuWon didn't look back at Mujin. Staring at the holy fire, YuWon's eyes seemed hazy and out of focus. And after a moment, YuWon slowly collapsed forward. A few days later, when YuWon woke up, the first thing YuWon did was check the condition of his body. Next on the list was to check his newly obtained reward. Divine Fire was an S+ rank skill. Depending on the enemy's emotions, it is able to exude greater power without any additional consumption of mana. It will not harm any targets one does not wish to hurt. It was a reward that YuWon was satisfied with and worth all the time he had spent on it. But, the Vice Lord of the Heavenly Demonic Cult. YuWon thought back to one of the messages. A title was a person's secondary name or position. Normally, even rankers struggled to obtain a single title, yet here YuWon had obtained one as a reward for the 10th floor. A few days had already passed, but the heavenly demon Cheon Mujin was still pondering over what he had witnessed. He had actually managed to obtain Divine Fire, he thought. YuWon got up from his spot and went outside. An attendant who was waiting for YuWon promptly led him to the Lord's manor. "So you're here," said Mujin. Cheon Mujin was sitting at the same spot as before in the same exact position. After a moment, they went outside the residence, and sat there to have their discussion. Is it still necessary for you to stay there? It's not like there's anything to guard anymore, YuWon said. Habits aren't so easy to fix. I tried going elsewhere, but I didn't quite feel comfortable, replied Mujin. The holy fire that Mujin had to protect was no longer there. It was now something for YuWon to carry. They continued their discussion. I obtained a title, said YuWon. Do you mean the title of Vice Lord? Keep it. You're plenty qualified, possessing both the holy fire and the heavenly demon spirit. Even if I become a ranker, I won't be joining the heavenly demonic cult, said YuWon. Do as you want. It's not something that's intended to tie you down anyway. It's a reward you obtain by passing the test fair and square, so you can reap the benefits as much as you want. Despite it taking a lot of courage for YuWon to tell this to Mujin, his response was surprisingly indifferent. Mujin continued speaking, he said. The heavenly demon divine cult had opposed Mirim for a long time. It's an authority that can rule over that power. It will become another precious reward for you. He didn't have any responsibilities but could still reap all the benefits, as Mujin said. YuWon was worried that Mujin might pick him as the next lord of the cult, but it seemed that wasn't the case. That was a good thing for YuWon. Then I'll take it gratefully, YuWon said while standing from his spot. Are you leaving right away? Mujin asked. I'll stop by again when it's time for the Grand Martial Arts Tournament, YuWon replied. Are you thinking of participating in the Grand Martial Arts Tournament? Mujin asked. I'm planning on it. That is, if I'm still below the 25th floor by then, replied YuWon. The Grand Martial Arts Tournament was a tournament for players between the 10th and 25th floors. Held 3 times a year, it was the most anticipated event on the lower floors. YuWon got up from his seat. He had barely anything left to pack. Rations and other necessities were all already inside his inventory. YuWon bowed his head to Mujin and left to climb up to the next floor. The Grand Martial Arts Tournament. Mujin murmured to himself again. With the holy fire finally finding its master, the hard shackles that had been holding him down for such a long time disappeared. Mujin, whose life mission had been protecting the holy fire, started wondering what should I do, for the first time ever. That's when it came to him. The thing that the heavenly demonic cult had wanted long before the divine fire appeared. His eyes sparked as he spoke. I guess it's time to return to the martial realm. The 11th floor was a world named Toklan. With over 90% of the land being mountains or forests, it wasn't all that great of an environment for people to live in. Due to that, the majority of the residents of the 11th floor were races of the forest like elves or dwarves. The test on the 11th floor was a team battle. Normally when you think of teams, you think of 5, maybe 10 people on each side, but that wasn't how the 11th floor's test was conducted. It was a test where there could be as few as 100 to as many as 200 people on each team, with the teams randomly formed from a pool of test participants. Inside a building in Toklan, a man was desperately praying. Please this time, the player Hyun mumbled while praying. He didn't believe in God, but around his time, he would always magically end up being religious. Currently, he is waiting for the test schedule. He heard the ring of the message, and soon after, a giant screen popped up in front of him. The screen was dense with letters. There were a total of 416 participants in this test. However, that wasn't the important part. The really important part was the members that participated in the test. Please, Hyun mumbled as he looked at the screen. I'm on Team A. Naturally, Lars and Melly are on the same team as me. As for the other guys. While looking around at the other names on the screen, Hyun started to sweat. Who are all of these guys? After going through over 100 names, he had only heard of a few of these guys, and all of them were pathetically unskilled. There was even someone that was blacklisted from trolling in the last test, putting their own team in danger. Hyun naturally ended up looking through the names of Team B. The first name was already not looking good. Loel. As a player with a rare healing type skill. And since Loel was on the roster, that meant that her teammates should also be on Team B. Of course those guys are with her. Wait, what's this? Namgung-hoon? This was also a terrifying name to see. Hyun was a direct pureblood of the Namgung clan. It was said that there were few who were capable of rivaling him on the lower floors. That very man was a part of Team B. What the hell is up with this? Halaman cried out loudly while slamming his fists on the table. It was impossible for him to not complain about this. Halaman had already failed the test 3 times. Not only did he lack skills, he also had shit luck when it came to his teams. This test is going to be the worst one yet, he mumbled to himself. What kind of deranged coincidence is this? It honestly made him doubt if the teams were even really decided at random. Still not giving up yet, he continued to look through the team roster, eventually coming across a familiar name. Kim YuWon? It was a name that he could never forget, having heard it so many times recently. Halaman tilted his head, staring at the 3-syllable name at the end of the Team A roster. Maybe it's just someone with the same name? For YuWon alone to be on Team A while all the other skilled players were on Team B, it seemed quite unbalanced. If it actually is him, he's also pretty unlucky. It was certain that YuWon had great skills. Halaman had never seen them with his own eyes, but this was a guy that had broken record after record starting on the first floor. But this test was doomed. Halaman was certain that even YuWon wouldn't be able to turn the tables by himself. Having confirmed all the members, Halaman turned back with no energy left in his body. The test was set to start in a week. YuWon had already reached the 11th floor. He went to an inn to rent out a room for his stay. YuWon took out the test rooster to check on the contestants. That's really childish, YuWon said, sighing deeply after checking the members list. There were quite a few familiar names on Team B: Roel, Namgung-hoon, Salamov. Spiros? I think this guy is an Olympian pureblood. There's also a guy from Asgard as well, YuWon wondered. On the other hand, Team A had no one he recognized. It wasn't hard to figure out why there was such a large difference between the two teams. If I remember correctly, the 11th floor belongs to Olympus. The test examiner is Hypnos, one of Olympus's rankers, YuWon thought. The 11th floor was one of the floors that Olympus had the greatest amount of influence over, and there was no way that Olympus would look kindly on the culprit that stopped them from capturing Hephaestus. So they're really going all out, huh? It was as plain as day to YuWon. They wanted YuWon to fail the test as payback. And as testing sites were extraterritorial zones where murder was allowed, they might even have a more sinister plan laid out for YuWon. However, well, whatever. After checking the lists of team members, YuWon simply turned away and walked towards the innkeeper. The next customer, said the inn owner Khalif, greeting the new customer with a hand on his chin. It was a new face he hadn't seen around. From his experience, most players who had just arrived on the 11th floor had a similar reaction to the previous guy. Are there any rooms left? The newbie asked. Of course, we have rooms, but the bottom floor's full. So what do you want to do? Said the innkeeper. If that's the case, give me a room on your top floor, YuWon replied calmly. Top floor? Khalif responded while straightening his pose, taking his hand off his chin. A room on the top floor costs 100 points. It doesn't matter, YuWon replied. For someone to not care about a 100-point room. That was an amount that, unless you were a pureblood from a top guild, you could never even dream of spending on just lodging. Khalif could smell the scent of money. By the way, you guys can do currency exchanges, right? Said YuWon. Khalif's eyes twinkled, quickly nodded his head in response, of course, sir. What bills are they? Realizing that this was a big-shot customer, Khalif's attitude did a 180, bringing his hands together and showing respect to YuWon. As guardian, 384 bills of 1,000 points. YuWon said while handing the innkeeper a thick white envelope. YuWon further said, I'd like you to exchange all of it into points, minus the exchange fee of course. A whopping 384 Asgardian bills. Seeing them made Khalif's eyes turn white from shock. As the bill exchanged, a message popped up, you have obtained 376,320 points. Exchanging the bills netted YuWon a large sum, but even without this money, He was already rich because of the obscenely large amount of points he had obtained from each floor. His total points were around 900k. YuWon went to the room he booked and called out loud, "Hey, lackey. Would you like to call a lackey?" Speaking into the player kit, a message popped up. YuWon responded to the player kit. The wait wasn't long. Lackeys had an exceptional ability to sniff out money. "What can I help you with?" With a bright voice, what appeared was not a pierrot, but instead was a finger-sized fairy with wings. YuWon thought the taste of the 11th floor's administrator was better than that of the tutorial's administrator. A fairy was much better to look at than a pierrot with a sickening, smiling face. "Is the shop usable right now?" said YuWon. "Of course. Please tell me what you want. We have everything there is, except for what we don't." The fairy was overtly friendly. It was completely different in every way from the lackeys of the tutorial. "It's probably due to the points I have," YuWon thought. "So what do you need, sir?" the lackey asked with a twinkle in its eyes. YuWon already knew what he needed, but he pretended to think for a moment. One of the ways to buy things cheap from a lackey was to appear that you didn't actually need the thing. Or else they'll jack up the prices, YuWon thought. "First, let me peruse a bit," said YuWon. "Of course, sir." With a flick of the lackey's hand, a hazy screen popped up in front of YuWon listing thousands of varieties of items. Looking around the screen nonchalantly, YuWon searched for a single item, adamantium. It was the only material that could complete the dark divine crystal. "I hope there's some available for sale," YuWon thought. Lackeys possessed a nearly uncountable amount of items. As long as he could purchase some adamantium and receive Hephaestus's help, he could obtain an item far greater than what was available here. "It's here." YuWon's eyes twinkled before he caught himself. His facial expression almost revealed his true feelings for lackey. After finding the adamantium, YuWon still browsed over items, only coming back to it much later. "How much is this?" he asked. The lackey smiled after seeing what YuWon was pointing at. He replied, "Adamantium. Nice choice, but there are plenty of other good objects as well, so why that one? Finished items are too expensive. I thought it'd be cheaper to purchase the raw materials and make something myself," YuWon replied while looking up at the fairy. "That is normally true, however, it is a bit different for adamantium." The lackey's eyes were smiling. He continued, "This is an unbreakable material, and not only does it have great mana conductivity, it can even amplify mana. There's no other mineral like it in the world." YuWon could tell that something was wrong. The lackey appeared as if it knew something. The lackey went on a spiel, but YuWon already knew how great of a mineral adamantium was. Adamantium is the only material out there that can self-amplify mana. Taking its hardness and durability into account, it's honestly a cheat-like material, YuWon thought to himself. That was the reason why blacksmiths described adamantium as the material of dreams, but due to its incredible hardness and durability, there were less than 10 blacksmiths in the entire tower that were capable of handling this mineral. The lackey continued babbling, "As long as you can get your hands on it, you can definitely make an amazing item out of it. Of course, there aren't many blacksmiths who can handle it, but you're acquainted with Hephaestus, aren't you?" The lackey knew about YuWon's relationship with Hephaestus. YuWon had a serious look in his eyes as he spoke, "So why does that matter?" The lackey spoke, "Well, since you're a player capable of getting it crafted into any item, wouldn't that naturally increase its value?" Lackey wasn't wrong. Any other player that came across adamantium would have to first face the hurdle of finding a blacksmith that could refine it. And even if they found someone capable, they'd need to pay an exorbitant crafting cost. In that regard, YuWon was in an extremely advantageous position, with Hephaestus being greatly indebted to him. So the lackey said, "That is why the value of adamantium will be far higher for you." YuWon had a slight snarl on his face. The conversation had gone on longer than he wanted in a direction he disliked. "So, what's the price?" he asked. "Yes. It'll be 1.5 million points for 1.7 kilograms of adamantium," the lackey replied. "I don't have that much money." YuWon's expression turned sour as the lackey continued on with the babbling and increased the price out of nowhere. I am able to provide a loan with an interest of 11.5%. Actually, since you are a reputable player, I can even give you a loan at a 10% interest rate, said the lackey. Lackeys were businessmen at heart. YuWon let out a deep sigh. A loan, you say? I guess it can't be helped. The lackey nodded its head and spoke, excellent choice. Then the points you are short on will be borrowed through a loan at an interest rate. The lackey was quite happy as he got a famous player in his hands, and with the loan interest he could control YuWon however he wanted. But suddenly, I'll just have to buy it elsewhere, YuWon said, closing the item shop window. It all happened in an instant. The lackey went into shock, but that didn't last long. It once again put on a nice smile. Hee. If that's the case, I could discount it a little bit. I'm not sure if you know, but this is a very rare item that can't be purchased elsewhere. The lackey started speaking in a trembling voice. Even without it, I'll have no difficulties climbing the tower. YuWon's response put the lackey into shock again for an entirely different reason. YuWon continued, I have plenty of time. There are lackeys on other floors, not to mention there are also auction houses. And if it comes down to it, I could also just buy a different item. In short, YuWon was telling the lackey that if it was going to propose such a price, he had no intention of doing business with it. YuWon took a deep sigh and then said, let's just end this here. Wait, the lackey said in a panic. YuWon was smiling on the inside. He was now in control of the flow of things. YuWon had a serious look on his face and said coldly, I told you, let's forget it. I'm not buying. The lackey was intimidated by YuWon's reaction. YuWon kept on negotiating the price for adamantium, and then finally he said to the fairy, I will just buy it from you at 850,000 points. The fairy was so irritated by YuWon's babbling that it wanted to beat him up, but due to the limited number of people capable of crafting, paired with the price, there were very few actual purchases and sales of adamantium. So even though it was valuable, for a lackey, holding onto it did nothing for it. In the end, 850k was still a lot of points, and it was unknown when another big baller like YuWon would come by. So it was essential for the lackey to secure YuWon here. 850,000 points. That was a fairly reasonable price, and it was the result of a long haggling session. That might even be cheaper than the market price, YuWon thought. YuWon nodded his head, if that's the price, I will purchase it. The lackey, who looked like it was on the brink of tears, brightened up a little. But that was short-lived. The lackey carefully opened its mouth. After watching YuWon's scary expression, the lackey accepted the deal. Anyway, could you do? Never mind. Let's just do 850k. The lackey then happily offered the deal with the corresponding price. A screen opened in front of YuWon with the deal. He accepted it. With this, YuWon had spent 850,000 points and went broke, but he finally obtained adamantium. After finishing the deal, lackey further asked YuWon, is there anything else you need? But YuWon nodded in denial. Then please call me again, if you need something. After saying this, the fairy disappeared. It was a pretty decent trade for YuWon. Truthfully, the sooner he obtained adamantium, the better it was for him. Now I need to get this to Odyssey. YuWon thought while looking at the pure dark divine crystal on the back of his invisible glove. However, I need this for the next test. The 11th floor was Olympus's domain. That meant that Olympus had many options to manipulate the test as well as to lay traps for him. Even for someone like Hephaestus, refining adamantium was no easy task, adding to the list of reasons why not too many people sought out this amazing mineral. 1 month at the very least, to even over 3 months. That's how long it would take to produce the item. The pure dark divine crystal was YuWon's greatest weapon. Not only could it release its own mana, but it could also change the attribute of mana with little effort. I'll have to go down as soon as I finish this test. With a week left until the test, YuWon actually had a lot of time remaining. After taking a moment to think, YuWon checked his status window before getting up. If that's the case, why don't I go for a walk? Hyun was one of the so-called geniuses. Not only was he a talented pureblood player, being a direct descendant of the Namgung clan, he had a background that supported his skills. Having come from one of the top martial clans in the martial realm, as well as having a father who was an executive at the mid-sized martial guild, he'd had no obstacles. With all those qualities, Hyun was definitely qualified to be the leader of his group. Somewhere in the 11th floor forest, a huge beast fell after being injured and killed by players. It was Namgung Hyun and his party members who were clearing the labyrinth of Agria. One of his teammates spoke. "This isn't as hard as I thought it'd be. I was expecting more since I heard it was the hardest dungeon on the 11th floor." Another one among the team said, "If this is all there is to it, we can definitely see it through to the end." One of them said, "Well, that's a given considering who we have with us." Hyun's teammates, whose morale was at an all-time high, all turned their gazes to Hyun, who was wiping his sword with a towel. Namgung Hyun had long hair that was tied up in a traditional topknot. He was silently preparing to continue the raid of the dungeon, looking after a large sword that was the size of his own body. Hyun got up from his seat. Having rested plenty, he picked one of the splitting pads, saying, "How about this way?" The 10 teammates were in unanimous consent with his decision. Being a maze-type dungeon, unless you had a high search-type skill, it was basically luck of the draw. "Since we don't have a lot of time, let's hurry. We don't have many days left if we want to finish the dungeon raid and get some rest before the test," said Hyun. As all of them walked in one direction, one of them said, "The test, you say? Now that I think about it, it really is almost upon us." Another one said, "Is there any need to be so nervous? This test looks like it'll be a complete cakewalk. Team A is just full of scrubs." Despite the scale of the battle, the team composition was so far in their favor it was practically impossible to feel nervous. As they were chattering, one among them said, "There was one person that was noteworthy though, YuWon. He even passed the Heavenly Demonic Cults test." Another one said, "He's really fucking unlucky, ending up on that team." Rumor had already spread that YuWon was on Team A. People thought that this would end up being his first major setback after having smashed the records of every floor so far. Still, if he can even win this test, it'll really prove that he's great. In a way, it'd be another record. Because of that, people started to talk, speculating whether or not YuWon would simply give up this test. "Stop chatting and stay on your guard. We don't know when there might be an ambush," Hyun said, taking the lead and scolding his teammates. "We're going to give it our all in this test as well. That's all there is to it." "Alright, got it." Replying to Hyun, his teammates looked at how reliable their leader was. Agria's maze is said to be the hardest dungeon on the 11th floor. Centered around Hyun, his team was raiding that very dungeon. "We all have to level up 1 or 2 levels. And actually defeating Agria should help the finances of the team quite a bit," Hyun thought while tightly gripping his sword. YuWon, huh? Hyun had heard that name multiple times before. He was one of the players that were making names for themselves on the lower floors, just like him. In fact, it was well regarded that YuWon was far superior to him. He didn't know where YuWon was a pureblood from, but he honestly wasn't all that curious. What he really wanted to know was if his skills were as great as rumored. "I'd like to be able to face him at least once in this test." While he was lost in thought, they arrived at the next room. Hyun, who was using his surge skill, sensed a vicious energy inside the final room. He got startled, tensing his eyes, and he immediately stopped. "Stop for a second," he ordered his team while slowly stepping forward. "Everyone, prepare for combat." Despite being ready for a fight, Hyun suddenly stopped in his tracks. His teammates who were following him asked in confusion, "What's wrong? Is something there?" His teammates' reactions were no different than his. At the end of the tunnel, a large, circular room appeared. Inside that room, there was a purple blaze as well as dozens of spider monsters that were burnt to a crisp by the very same flames. What the hell is all this? Were they all burnt to death? There were far more scorched spider monsters in this room than in any of the previous rooms. Dozens, maybe even 100 giant spiders even larger than the ones in the previous rooms lay dead. And that wasn't all. "Look over there," one of the party members shouted, focusing the group's attention on where they were pointing. Their finger pointed up at the ceiling. Hyun's eyes widened after seeing what was up there. That's actually a really big spider? It was obvious to anyone who wasn't an idiot. It was the boss of this dungeon. Agria, the queen of spiders who hadn't been defeated for years now. Did it die while stuck on the ceiling? While his companions were lost in confusion, Hyun jumped up. Running across the wall, he reached the ceiling, kicking Agria's corpse and dropping it to the floor. Because of how massive the corpse was, the chamber shook for a moment. The huge body fell on the floor with a bang. They could not believe what their eyes were witnessing. A huge boss monster got burned into ashes. Who could have done it? Everyone had questions in their mind. They started murmuring, who could have done it? The monster's body is so burnt, but there are no fire traces surrounding it. Hyun closely inspected Agria's corpse as the purple flames started to extinguish themselves. It wasn't only burnt by fire, he thought. Inspecting the corpse would give him an approximate idea of the killer's skills. Coming from a martial clan specializing in the sword, Hyun was exceptional at reading traces of swordsmanship. These marks were definitely created by a sword. The sword's length is approximately 1.3 meters. They managed to slice through Agria in a single swing after softening it with heat, Hyun thought. Having checked the slash mark, Hyun was able to picture the fight in his head. The monstrously large Agria. A player that can control purple fire. And the player's movement, slicing Agria in a single strike while it screamed in agony from being burnt alive. Hyun felt a chill up his spine. He wondered what might happen if he had to fight the player that did this. Looking around at his surroundings, he realized that there weren't any burn marks on the chamber itself. He had never heard of a skill that could do something like this. Was this maybe done by a ranker, he said, thinking out loud? That was the only possible conclusion he could come to. The one who did this was simply too powerful for it to have been a player on just the 11th floor. But that still beckoned the question, why would a ranker come all the way down here? We'll have to go back, Hyun said. The boss room that was found sooner than expected had already been cleared by someone else who got there before them through a different route. Hyun had no choice but to give up on this dungeon. On the other side, after checking what he read from the dungeon, YuWon put the lump of thread the size of his head into his inventory. It was the reward that YuWon got after defeating the Spider Queen Agria in the labyrinth. It's a thread from the Spider Queen Agria. It has a high mana conductivity, and it is super elastic. It is also harder than steel. I got lucky. He ended up hitting an unexpected jackpot in the dungeon he entered on a whim to test out his skill. This much should fetch at least 1,000 points. Alternatively, I could also just keep it and use it later. He was already in a good mood when he stumbled upon this jackpot. After exiting the dungeon, YuWon called forth mana to his hand. A purple fire appeared above his palm. It's even greater than I expected. There were things that simply couldn't be explained by the text in a skill window. Having become a skill, the ability to wield the divine fire became engraved into his instincts. However, without actually using the skill, it was impossible to understand the full capabilities of how to use it. That's why YuWon wanted to test it out before the test. For being an S+ rank skill, the firepower isn't that great, but that's inevitable with a low proficiency. But that's not what's important. Divine fire was a fire that grew bigger by eating the opponent's emotions, which was one of the scariest abilities that outers possessed. Controlling one's emotions was difficult no matter how strong a mental fortitude one possessed. This applied to fear as well. Once I have a higher arcane power stat as well as a higher proficiency, the effect should increase manyfold. He had obtained quite a lot in this hunt, including raising the completion rate of Heaven Slaying Star, which had stagnated during his long stay on the 10th floor. Its completion rate had gone up to 90%. YuWon was now in the final stretch of completing Heaven Slaying Star. This is going faster than I expected. His current growth speed was much faster than originally planned, but as the path ahead was thorny and treacherous, he couldn't be satisfied with his current progress. After returning to the inn, YuWon found a group of players gathered around, loitering in front of his room. They all had worried looks on their faces. What are you guys doing in front of someone else's room? YuWon asked. As he walked down the hallway, they focused their gazes on YuWon. There were a total of 8 players, none of which YuWon had met before. "Are you YuWon by chance?" one of them asked. As expected, their business was with YuWon. After taking a second to think about how he should respond, YuWon nodded his head. "So?" he said, thinking that it was pointless to lie. "We are fellow members of Team A, like you. My name is Halaman." YuWon nodded his head, signaling them to go on. Halaman, glad to know that YuWon intended to hear them out, carried on. "As you know, the teams are highly disproportionate in this test. Team B has many well-known players, such as Nam Gung-hoon. YuWon already knew all this, but he simply didn't care. However, the same couldn't be said of everyone other than YuWon. About half the players on Team A have already forfeited, but there are still half remaining, Halaman said. "And is that because of me?" YuWon asked. YuWon's perceptiveness made Halaman nod his head in surprise. "Yes. There are many skilled players on Team B, but I'm sure none of them are on your level. The remaining half believe that because you are on the team. And that has nothing to do with the fact that you guys are out of points?" YuWon interrupted Halaman. Maybe it was because YuWon hit the nail on the head, but Halaman and the others looked away. On every floor, every time you took the test, players had to pay a test fee. The test fee was as low as 100 points and as high as 1,000 points. On top of that, if you failed the test and wanted to try again, you had to pay the test fee again. Since it'd be a waste of points to just give up, you want to make an attempt by rallying around someone reliable. "Is that it?" YuWon asked. "That's a rude accusation," Halaman said. He walked towards YuWon and said desperately, "We just wanted to discuss how we could pass the test together." "I have something to say about that," YuWon said while walking past the players to his room. "If you value your lives, just give up. There's nothing that amazing up there that's worth potentially dying a meaningless death." YuWon already knew well what lay at the top of the tower, as well as the power that rankers ended up attaining. It's all meaningless, YuWon thought to himself. 9 out of 10 would lose their lives in the process. And this test was even more dangerous than usual. I should be the only one to enter this tiger's den. This test was rigged, and aimed at YuWon, and the other members of Team A were simply the sacrificial lambs. Thinking that there was no need for them to be moths flying into the flames, he wished that they would give up on this test. "Now if you have nothing else to say, go away. It's not a pretty sight, being gathered around a stranger's room," YuWon said while opening his door. He had nothing more to say to them. Halaman, who had been gritting his teeth from the humiliation, opened his mouth while trembling. "So you're also just going to give up?" Half the team had already forfeited the test. If YuWon also gave up, the remaining 1% chance would vanish. "No," YuWon replied, contrary to Halaman's expectations. "I'm going to challenge the test." "Huh? But you just told us to give up and that." Halaman tried to speak, but YuWon entered his room. He glanced back at Halaman and the other players while closing the door, leaving them with a final line, "That only applies to you guys." The door closed. They didn't go away right away, so YuWon could hear whispering outside his door. If he tried hard, he would be able to make out what they were saying, but he didn't bother. "I wonder how many of them will give up," he thought. There weren't many who valued their life so little that they would be willing to challenge the test even knowing YuWon wasn't going to cooperate with them. So for anyone that remained, it meant that they were that desperate, and so they'd be at least somewhat useful. Halaman gritted his teeth after YuWon shut the door in his face. His face turned sour. He wanted to take revenge for the embarrassment he faced today. On the other side, Hypnos, the test examiner, once again looked through the list of the participating players. First Team and then Team B. Quite a few familiar names were visible. There was too great of a difference in skills between the two teams. Hyun alone was known as a super rookie capable of potentially becoming a high ranker one day. But the cream of the crop is this guy, Kim YuWon, Hypnos said to himself. It made the names of the players on Team B look pathetic in comparison. His name was famous, not only among the players of the lower floors but even among rankers. How did someone with such a bright future end up with a target on his back? Hypnos pushed his hair back. From the top of the tower, There was one single order given out by the great Olympus: exterminate the player Kim YuWon, and you will be handsomely awarded. Within the space of this test, it would become possible to try and do something to YuWon, and on the 11th floor, where Hypnos was the test examiner, YuWon was basically in the palm of Olympus's hand. The preparations should almost be finished. Hypnos let out a long sigh, laying his head on the bull's back. If this test went well, not only would he be given a few days of vacation, but he would also be rewarded well by Olympus. Just the thought of that was enough to make Hypnos smile. That was when Hypnos's player kit rang. It was a message. Who's sending me a message right before the test? He thought. The annoyance from having his sweet daydream interrupted didn't last long. After seeing who the message was from, he reflexively sat up in a proper position. It was from Hera, one of the 8 high rankers that symbolized Olympus and the wife of Zeus, king of Olympus. The test was to be held in the dark forest Elalom. Hypnos reached the test site on his white bull and started analyzing the players. The day of the test dawned. Teams A and B had gathered. There was a sharp contrast in the number of players the two teams had. Hypnos counted all the players that had arrived on time. Team A, 51 people, and Team B, 200 people. More players came than I expected, Hypnos said, seeing all the players that came for Team A. To think he'd actually participate. Hypnos thought while looking at the reason this many people even showed up. Does he not know that this is a trap? Kim YuWon's presence was what made this possible. The player that set a new record on every floor, even passing the heavenly demonic cults test. Despite all those achievements, Hypnos thought that he was too overconfident. There's no way he thinks he can overcome this much of a difference by himself, he thought. Does he think he might be able to do something because this is a test? Ahem, Hypnos slightly coughed while observing the players. Hello, everyone. When the voice resounded, YuWon looked up. The person continued, my name is Hypnos. I'm the test examiner on the 11th floor. Hypnos's gaze went from YuWon to Hyun, Roel, Spiros, and others. The various rankers observing this test were either sponsors of these players or members of guilds that wanted to recruit them. Team A looks short of a lot of people. But there will be no changes made, and we will go forward with these teams as is, Hypnos announced. The players on Team A who held but a sliver of hope all let out a sigh. If the teams were resorted, their chances could have gone up. I'll get straight to the point by explaining the contents of the test, and starting immediately, Hypnos said, while raising his hand. Suddenly a red flag appeared in his hand as he said, this floor's trial has captured the flag. Hypnos continued to explain, the test is simple, but I should first explain that the flags have been crafted through technomancy, and are capable of doing the following. Hypnos pulled out another flag and brought them together, which made one of them disappear into thin air, and the remaining flag was now the number 2. This number represents the number of flags. I'm sure you won't forget this unless you're a complete imbecile, said Hypnos. Now, the challenge is where the flags are, Hypnos spoke while looking at the massive forest behind him. This forest has been cleared out by administrators for the sake of this trial. He continued, the flags are laid out across the forest. In the middle of the road, at the bottom of a cliff, at the top of a tree, and even on the body of a monster. You have no idea how much of a struggle it was to set them up. Hypnos's explanation made a few players chuckle. They could visualize how much hard work it must have been to lay out flags across such a big forest. Hypnos continued, you guys just have to collect the flags that are spread out throughout the forest. The team that collects the highest number of flags at the end wins. Simple, right? From the explanation, it really did seem simple. However, this wasn't such an easy test. Hypnos continued, but this test is called Capture the Flag, not Collect the Flag. This isn't a children's game like tag or something like that, Hypnos said while smirking. You will be able to take the flags that your opponents have collected. The method does not matter. You can steal, threaten, kill, or do whatever you like in order to take them. That was the true essence of the test. It didn't matter if you couldn't find a single flag. If you could take your opponent's flags, you could win in the end. Finally, this test has kings. YuWon's brows furrowed. This was the reason that this test would be complicated. Hypnos reassured the players that the role of the king is critical because any flags that the king holds are counted as double. Don't worry. It's not like chess. You won't fail just because your king dies. The eyes of the players of Team A all lit up. For a team with significantly fewer members, their only option was to utilize the king to their full potential. The king is decided randomly. You all know how it is. This is a shitty luck-based test, Hypnos said while laughing. Naturally, all their gazes looked towards YuWon. And YuWon understood immediately what their gazes meant. YuWon felt an urge to punch Hypnos in his smug face. This was going to happen because Hypnos is one of Olympus' lackey. This is going to be annoying. YuWon wondered why it had to be capture the flag. Okay. Now then the test will begin, Hypnos announced. A blue magic array appeared underneath the two teams. The magic array lit up and the view changed. YuWon looked around at his surroundings, which were somewhere inside the forest. So we've all been transported, YuWon thought to himself. All the players of Team A were transported to the same location. Somewhere in this forest were flags for them to search and find. The priority was figuring out who the king was, which wasn't hard at all. Huh? What's up with you, man? What's going on with your body? YuWon looked over at the commotion. There was a guy by himself shining in the shady forest. It was Halaman. It says, "I'm the king," Halaman said in a daze, not having expected himself to become the king. YuWon let out a deep sigh. That reaction alone was enough to disqualify him in YuWon's mind. What do I do? Halaman asked. They were already in a disadvantageous situation, and the king that was supposed to be the crux of this test was in a state of total confusion. It honestly makes me wonder how he even got this far, YuWon thought disapprovingly. The first one to break away from the group was YuWon. All the players on Team A had been closely watching YuWon and Halaman. Seeing YuWon walk into the distance, Halaman asked, "Where are you going?" YuWon turned to look at Halakan and said, "I'm going to go grab the flags, so don't go off and get killed somewhere and just stay here." YuWon kept on walking after his reply. Halaman followed up YuWon's response with, "You're not going to protect the king? That's not how you're supposed to beg for your life." "Don't worry. There won't be any fighting right away," YuWon replied. After saying that to Halaman, who had fallen into the role of the king, YuWon looked over at the other players, advising them, "Don't just fool around. If you guys want to climb up, you need to obtain even the smallest bit of CP and secure a reward." The players on Team A nodded their heads at YuWon's words. At least it looks like they got the gist of it, YuWon thought. Seeing the players move one by one, he himself started to get moving again. The forest was quiet, but the 11th floor forest was essentially a large dungeon with monsters creeping around every corner. YuWon's eyes turned red, and immediately the forest felt like a wide-open plain to him. He could easily see a monster passing by far beyond the trees. "I guess it's time for me to start running," YuWon pondered and then started hunting flags. On the other side, Namgung-hoon was analyzing the situation. "Well, this is going to be a complete walk in the park," someone from the team spoke. Unlike Team A, there was not a shred of tension among Team B. Another one said, "There's just way too big a difference." The mood was completely relaxed. Hoon looked around at his companions who had come with him, observing the same thing. Being too nervous isn't good, a deep voice ripped throughout Team B, but being too lax is even worse. Hoon's words made his companions tense up a little. It was something he had told them multiple times. For every test, Hoon insisted on a moderate level of tension. The only opponent they had to be cautious of in this test was YuWon. That meant the only variables for them were YuWon and the existence of the king. The players on Team B started skedaddling. Hoon's brows furrowed watching them. They didn't understand a word, he thought. "Are you nervous?" said a voice from behind Hoon, making him turn his head. It was a woman with stunning blonde hair that reached her waistline. Her radiant beauty paired with pure white clothes was enough for her to grab everyone's attention around her. Hoon wasn't all that interested in others, but he knew her name. "Your name is Roel, right? I'm honored that you know my name," She was called the Angel Roel. The nickname Angel came from both her beauty and her ability. A gentle breeze blew around her. Hyun felt his body becoming lighter. He narrowed his eyes, realizing that it was the result of Roel's ability. Healing and buffing. Their uncommon abilities, he thought. There weren't many support players. Not only was it hard for them to fight alone, but they were also the most susceptible to danger. Paired with the fact that it was hard to obtain buffing skills, it severely limited the number of support players. Roel was a rising star among the few support players. Thanks to that, despite being only on the 11th floor, she was as highly valued as players on the top floors. Don't be too nervous. It's an undeniable fact that there is a massive difference in power, she told Hyun. That is an undeniable fact. Or that's how it looks on the surface, said Hyun. What do you mean? Roel asked. Hyun replied while looking around at the players that were spreading out, don't you think it's odd? For being randomly placed, there's too large a difference between the teams. Is this not just a coincidence, said Roel. Namgyung Hyun continued and said, in the world I'm from, there is a saying. There's no such thing as coincidence in the world of the strong. When something looked like a coincidence, there was likely a hidden reason for what was going on. Hyun felt that something was off with this test. And the same went for Roel. But we're still on Team B. Does the reason really matter? She told Hyun. I guess, Hyun replied, but on his face was a look of doubt. Did the reason really not matter? By the way, who is our team's king? Does anyone know? Roel asked. Hyun's companions shook their heads in response. The same went for Roel's companions. It must be a not very well-known player, seeing as how no one knows, Roel spoke nonchalantly. She didn't really care who the king was. Meanwhile, Team A was in a position where they had to protect the king. Hyun thought, I guess it's inevitable that she doesn't care. But Hyun wondered about the face of the king that flashed gold in color. What did that guy look like? It was the strangest thing. Due to his great memory, since he was a kid, he never forgot something he saw once. Yet he couldn't remember the face of the king on his own team. Halaman didn't move around by himself. Rather, to be exact, he couldn't. He was accompanied by many people on top of his regular companions. They had gained a sliver of hope in a test that originally seemed doomed. It was thanks to the number of flags the two teams held. The difference was almost double, but that didn't necessarily mean despair. At the bottom of a cliff, a red flag could be seen. It was the fourth flag they had found. A member of Team A scaled down the cliff to fetch the flag. There are way too few flags spread out around the path. The other 3 flags were all held by monsters, he said. They were collecting the flags while escorting the king. As important as protecting the king was, if they couldn't collect any flags, it would be entirely meaningless. It really might be doable as long as we can get the enemy team's king, they wondered. We can overcome this difference if we can just get their king, Halaman thought. And the only one who can do that is him, Kim YuWon. Halaman thought while tightening his grip on his flag. It was highly likely that a good number of the 59 flags were found by YuWon. When Halaman met YuWon for the first time, he did not think that he was going to cooperate with the team, but now that it all depends on him, they might be able to win this trial. He coldly left me alone and told me to wait quietly, which meant he would be coming back soon, wondered Halaman. But this place is really big. Navigating around is also no joke, someone from Team A spoke up. Another person responded and said, I wonder where Team B's starting point is. Since we agreed to meet up at midnight and pool our flags together, we should hurry up. Suddenly a sound came. It was the sound of a branch snapping, and it wasn't caused by any of the party members present. Halaman and the other players turned their heads towards the source of the sound. Who goes there? Someone from Team A spoke. The area became silent, and no presence could be felt. But that didn't last long. Suddenly, the surrounding area grew noisier, and they could feel the presence of multiple people. Come on! They found out. A voice came from the deep forest, and with the voices some shadows could be seen. The group leader spoke with a smirk on his face. Who was it that stepped on the branch? I told you guys to watch your feet. To each side, players of the opposing team had a faint red glow to them. This was likely a similar principle to how the king shone gold. A group of people walked out from the forest. They were players from Team B. And with that, players from the enemy team have appeared. Defend your flags. A message popped up for players of Team A. It's just that I'm worried about YuWon on Team A. Even YuWon won't be able to do jack shit if he doesn't have a king. A few players on Team B did become more alert after hearing Hyun's warning earlier. They were players that were intimidated by YuWon's name. However, their objective wasn't YuWon, but the king. Due to the rules of the test, as long as they got Team A's king, victory was as good as theirs, not to mention the flags and CP they'd gained from taking down the king. Why are there so many people here? Someone from the team shouted. Damn it. Don't be a wimp. We have 10 people on our side. Another person from Team A shouted in response, and brought out his weapon from the inventory to push forward. But it was of no use. A faint red line appeared across the neck of the player that was trying to retaliate. Then soon after, his head fell to the ground, and a player wearing a black mask appeared behind wielding a dagger. It was an assassin. The blood of the said player spewed all around. Hyun was stunned. He could only see his team getting slaughtered right in front of him. His body trembled as the assassin turned to look at him. 10? The assassin said with a smirk on his face. I think you mean 9. The players of Team A cried in agony while being slaughtered by their enemies. As Team B noticed Team A getting panicked and running for their lives, they laughed and started running after them to kill as many as they could. We give up. We surrender. The players started shouting. Unfortunately, you couldn't give up on this test. The players on Team A fell into a panic. They were aware that there was a difference in skills, but they didn't know it would be this great. Run! This way, Hyun. I'll stop them somehow. Hyun's teammates pulled him by his hand. At first, Hyun's head went blank, but he started moving at the thought that he had to survive no matter what. It was complete and utter chaos. Hyun wasn't that fast at running. The teammate that pulled him was instantly killed on the spot. Hyun was rather stunned in place. Where do you think you're going? The king's head is mine. Someone from the enemy team shouted and started charging towards Hyun. He killed anyone who came in his way. Hyun was being chased by enemies from all sides, so Hyun had no choice but to draw his sword. Stop! Stop! Hyun shouted. What are you looking at? A voice said from behind him, causing a shiver to run down Hyun's spine. He fell onto the ground. Hyun's eyes widened. It was the assassin that first killed his teammate. Hyun shouted in fear. He could feel the cold blade coming closer to his neck, so he closed his eyes, anticipating death. This is it for me, Hyun thought. And with this, it's our victory. The assassin's voice trailed off. Hyun's head remained in one piece. Confused, he opened his eyes and heard a familiar voice. A figure appeared in front of him and cut the assassin in half. I told you to stay still. It was the voice he wanted to hear more than anything. Why do people never listen to me? Blood splashed on Hyun's back. YuWon had arrived. Mr. YuWon. Hyun shouted, relieved to see YuWon. In his eyes, it looked as if YuWon had wings on his back. YuWon slashed his sword once more, to remove the blood from it. Hyun was finally relieved. The players of Team B all faltered, pausing their chase after Hyun, the king that was glowing gold. The Kim YuWon? Damn it. It's the real deal. Look over there. Kale died in a single strike. The player that went by the name of Kale was pretty skilled within Team B. Should we retreat? But we outnumber him. Isn't this a chance for us? Someone from Team B spoke up. Team B was split in their opinions. Don't be stupid. Did you forget who we're up against? We should back off. Another person voiced out his thoughts. YuWon's appearance put a damper on the chaos. As they were mumbling, YuWon suddenly charged towards them. He slashed 2 of the enemy players in half, instantly killing them. And then kept on charging forward. Are you fucking kidding me? We were just going to back off. but you had to provoke us. Alright, let's go at it. A player from Team B took a step towards YuWon and, after speaking, he jumped into the air and charged towards YuWon. The sound of slicing through bone echoed through the forest. The player who had shown killing intent while walking towards YuWon ended up getting his body sliced in half. The assassin could not even react to what had happened. None of the blood got on YuWon, however, as he repelled all the red drops aimed at him with his sword. That's one down. YuWon's eyes glowed crimson as he killed the player. It was like a bloodthirsty demon out on a hunt. A flag fell to the ground. YuWon picked up the flag. When the player shouted, "Wait, wait!" he took out his flags from his inventory, and then knelt down on the ground, raising the flag high with both hands, showing his surrender. YuWon did not needlessly kill the players and stopped his onslaught. You obtained 2 flags. You obtained 20 CP. A CP notification popped up with his procurement of the flag. The other enemy players started backing off in fear as they witnessed one of them getting killed and the other kneeling on the ground begging for his life. YuWon looked at the other players while addressing them. "What will you guys do?" YuWon asked them. The guys who seemed like they were about to explode suddenly fell silent. The situation had changed. The dozen or so players on Team B all had sour looks on their faces. The players of Team B tried to gauge the situation, trying to decide what to do. If they gave up their flags, they'd be able to leave with their lives intact. "We'll give up." "Well then, hand over everything you guys have," YuWon said, collecting the flags. You obtained a flag. You obtained 10 CP. YuWon gathered multiple flags at once. YuWon smiled wide. From a party of over a dozen players, he managed to take 8 flags. They had quite a few on them, YuWon thought. Because it hadn't been that long since the test had begun, there were quite a few players who didn't have a flag yet. So it was a big haul that more than half the players present had a flag on them. After obtaining the 8 flags, YuWon decided he had to change gears. "The first half of the game is over," YuWon said. It had been about 4 hours since the test started. That was enough time for quite a few flags to have been found. From here on out, it was more efficient to hunt players on the enemy team rather than hunt monsters. Hyun was confused. Only 4 hours had passed since the trial started, but the game was already half over. He stuttered while he spoke. "Yes, well. Is that so? Where are the other teammates?" YuWon asked. Everyone spread out. "We decided that the best starting move was to gather as many flags as possible," replied Hyun. "That was a smart decision," YuWon mumbled while looking at the number on his flag. "That is as long as you guys don't end up having it stolen." Hyun's gaze turned to YuWon's flag. Upon checking the number of flags he had collected, Hyun's eyes widened. 27 flags? That was an unbelievable amount for someone to have collected alone. He did just obtain 8, but that meant that even before they met up, he already had 19 flags. 1 flag was already difficult to obtain. Hyun wondered how it was possible for YuWon to obtain 19 in such a short time. Hyun checked his team's flags. Team A had collected 64 flags. Among the 64 flags, 27 were in YuWon's possession. Is he really planning on carrying this test by himself? Hyun wondered. From the beginning, YuWon wasn't treating this as a team-based test. But the number of flags doesn't add up. Hyun was confused. When he had checked earlier, the number of flags on Team A was 59. So with the 8 flags YuWon just took, their total should have been 67. It's finally started, the capture portion of the test, YuWon said after he, too, checked the number of flags. YuWon looked at Hyun and continued speaking. Team B's going to start coming after our flags. And like these guys, some of them are going to start aiming for the king. Me? Hyun asked stutteringly. He still couldn't stop shaking from the fear. Is there another king here? YuWon said. That's true, but... Hyun tried to speak but was interrupted. So from here on out, do not be more than 20 m away from me. Even I will have a hard time winning this test without the king. To YuWon, Hyun was an annoyance but also necessary because he needed the king to win. Not only was his team outnumbered 4-1, but there were also no reliable players on Team A. And I need the king to get double the CP. So as annoying as it is, it's better if I keep this guy by my side. YuWon thought it would be much easier if he could be the king, but if that were the case, he wouldn't be able to obtain as much CP. It was a high-risk, high-reward situation. In the end, this was a test YuWon had to hustle by himself. After discussing all of it with Halaman, YuWon turned to leave again as he said, "The real trial starts now." What do guys think? Will YuWon be able to overcome the difficulties laid down in his path and keep on moving forward, or will it become his first failure? That's all for today. If you like the next part of this manhwa, just comment below. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment to get epic content on this channel. See you next time.